Every house on my street sold within 7 months. Not listed, not pending, sold. One family after another packed moving trucks, waved goodbye, and disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. People move, jobs change, life happens. But then I noticed something that didn't make sense. None of the houses were ever occupied again. No moving trucks arrived. No children played in the driveways. No lights stayed on after sunset. The lawns were neatly mowed. The mailboxes remained empty. Every porch light turned on automatically at exactly 7 every evening. But nobody lived there. By the end of autumn, my house was the only one on Willow Creek Drive that still had someone inside. Then a man in a navy suit knocked on my front door. He smiled politely, handed me a business card and said, "I'd like to make an offer on your property." "It's not for sale." He smiled again. "It will be." That was the moment I realized I wasn't living in a neighborhood anymore. I was living in the middle of someone else's plan. My name is Andrew Foster. I'm 45 years old. 2 years before all this happened, my divorce became final. No betrayal, no scandal. Just 2 people who eventually admitted we wanted different lives. I left Atlanta and moved back to my hometown of Ashford, North Carolina. Quiet, safe, predictable. Exactly what I thought I needed. I bought a modest ranch-style house on Willow Creek Drive, a dead-end street with 14 homes. It hadn't changed much since I was a teenager. Large maple trees, wide front lawns, neighbors who waved from their porches, kids riding bicycles until sunset. For almost a year it felt like home again. Then the Martins moved away. Tom and Susan Martin had lived across the street for nearly 20 years. One Saturday morning I walked outside to grab my newspaper and saw a moving truck in their driveway. "I didn't know you were moving." Tom smiled. "Neither did we." "What happened?" "We got an offer." "A good one." He laughed. "Better than good." "So where are you going?" He hesitated before answering. "Closer to family." The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd repeated them several times already. We shook hands. By sunset, they were gone. 3 weeks later, the Hendersons sold. Then the Ortiz family. Then Mrs. Palmer at the corner. Every sale followed the same pattern. No real estate signs. No online listings. No open houses. One day people lived there. The next, they were packing. Whenever I asked why they were leaving, the answers were almost identical. It was time. We had an opportunity. We couldn't turn it down. No one mentioned the buyer. No one negotiated. No one seemed excited, just strangely resigned. By spring, half the street was empty. The strange part wasn't that people had left. It was what happened afterward. Nothing. Weeks passed, then months. No new families, no contractors, no renovations. Every house simply sat there. The grass was cut every Tuesday. The hedges were trimmed every other Friday. Trash bins appeared at the curb every Thursday morning. Even though nobody lived inside. Whoever owned those houses wanted them to look occupied. They just didn't want anyone living there. Every evening after work, I'd stand at my living room window and count. 4 occupied houses, then 3, then 2. The silence became impossible to ignore. No barking dogs, no garage doors, no televisions through open windows, no children outside. Only perfectly maintained homes with nobody inside them. For the first time since moving back, I started locking my front door before sunset. One Monday morning, as I backed out of my driveway for work, I counted again. Mine. Frank Doyle's house at the end of the street. The Miller's place on the corner. Only 3. 4 months earlier, there had been 14 families. Now 11 houses stood perfectly still. Curtains closed. Driveways empty. American flags hanging exactly where their owners had left them. The neighborhood looked less like a place where people lived, and more like a movie set waiting for actors who never arrived. That afternoon, I stopped by Frank Doyle's house. Frank was 73, a retired electrician who had lived on Willow Creek Drive longer than anyone else. If someone knew what was happening, it would be him. He invited me inside without asking why I'd come. His front window overlooked nearly the entire street. "You think it's strange too?" I asked. He kept looking outside. I've lived here 31 years. I've never seen anything like this. So who keeps buying the houses? Frank walked to a drawer, pulled out a business card, and handed it to me. It was plain white. No logo. Only 3 lines. Lakeview Residential Holdings Property Acquisition Division, and a phone number. They came to see me too. When? About 6 weeks ago. What did they offer? He smiled quietly. More money than this place has any business being worth. You turned them down? I did. Why? Frank stared at the empty houses across the street. Because something felt wrong. What do you mean? He looked back at me. They seemed disappointed before I even answered. I frowned. As if they already expected I'd say no. Frank's words stayed with me the rest of the day. They already expected I'd say no. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. If someone wanted to buy a house, why would they assume the owner would refuse before making an offer? It sounded like they weren't negotiating. They were following a plan. 2 days later, another family disappeared. The Millers. I didn't even know they were moving until I saw their truck pulling away. I flagged Mr. Miller down before he reached the end of the street. Leaving already? He forced a smile. Looks like it. Where are you headed? He hesitated. I can't really talk about it. I laughed. Why not? He reached into the passenger seat and handed me a folded document. I probably shouldn't even show you this. Across the top it read, Confidentiality Agreement. Most of the page had been blacked out. Only one sentence remained visible. The seller agrees not to disclose the identity of the purchaser or the intended future use of the property. I looked back at him. You actually signed this? He nodded. They insisted. For selling a house? I know. It sounded crazy. So why agree to it? He glanced at the empty houses lining the street. They offered enough money that saying no became very difficult. Before I could ask anything else, he rolled up the window. Take care of yourself, Andrew. Then he drove away. I never saw him again. 3 days later, I became the last homeowner on Willow Creek Drive. Frank had accepted an offer after all. When I walked over to help him load the last few boxes into his truck, he looked exhausted. I thought you weren't selling. I wasn't. So what changed? They came back. And they doubled the offer. I nodded slowly. So you're moving. He looked directly at me. No, I'm escaping. Those words stayed with me long after his truck disappeared around the corner. Not moving, not retiring, escaping. That first night alone on the street felt wrong. Not frightening, just unnaturally quiet. No televisions, no barking dogs, no conversations drifting through open windows. At exactly 7 o'clock, every empty house lit up. Porch lights, living rooms, kitchen windows, all at the same moment. Automatic timers, perfect synchronization. It looked convincing from a distance, like families were settling in for the evening, but I knew every one of those houses was empty. I stood at my bedroom window watching the lights across the street. Then I saw movement. A curtain shifted inside the Henderson house. Just slightly. I leaned closer. A second later, it moved again. Someone was inside. I kept watching for almost a minute. Nothing else happened. Finally, I convinced myself it had been the wind, even though every window was closed. The next morning, I walked across the street carrying my coffee. Everything looked exactly the same, except one detail. A fresh newspaper sat at the end of the Henderson driveway. Yesterday's paper was gone. Today's edition had replaced it. Someone was delivering newspapers to empty houses. I walked onto the porch and rang the bell. No answer. I knocked. Still nothing. Looking through the front window, I felt even more uneasy. The living room looked untouched. Family photographs still sat on the fireplace. A blanket lay folded across the couch. A coffee mug rested beside the recliner. It looked as though the Hendersons had stepped out for an hour and never returned. Then I noticed the microwave clock. It was still on. Power hadn't been disconnected. Someone was paying every utility bill. As I turned back toward the street, a plain white pickup rolled slowly into the neighborhood. No company logo. No license plate frame. Nothing that identified it. The driver stopped beside me and lowered the window. "You live here?" "I do." He smiled politely. "You must be Andrew Foster." I hadn't introduced myself. "Have we met?" "No. But I know who you are." He handed me a sealed envelope. No obligation. Just information. Before I could ask another question, he drove away. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. No company logo. No signature. Just one sentence. "We would like to purchase your property for $1,850,000. I stared at the number. My house wasn't worth even half that. At the bottom, someone had handwritten another note. No inspections. No contingencies. Closing within 72 hours. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Nobody pays 3 times market value for an ordinary house, unless the house isn't what they really want. That afternoon, I drove straight to the county property records office. If one company had bought every house on my street, there had to be a paper trail. An elderly clerk spent nearly 20 minutes searching through the records before turning her monitor toward me. Every sale listed the same buyer, Lakeview Residential Holdings, LLC. Exactly the name printed on Frank's business card. "Can I see who owns the company?" I asked. She clicked through several pages. "Not directly." "What does that mean?" "This company is owned by another corporation." "And that one?" She clicked again. "Another corporation." The pattern continued. Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming. Each company belonged to another company. Eventually, she stopped clicking. "I've reached the end. So who's at the top?" She frowned at the screen. "There isn't one." "What do you mean?" "The ownership trail simply stops." She looked genuinely confused. "I've worked here 15 years. I've never seen records structured like this." On the drive home, I took a detour through the surrounding neighborhoods. Everything looked normal. Children rode bicycles, people washed their cars, dogs barked behind fences. Families worked in their gardens. Life was exactly as it should be. Only Willow Creek Drive looked abandoned. It was as if someone had erased an entire neighborhood without touching a single house. That evening, just before 7, I stood in my front yard. Right on schedule. Every empty house lit up. Porch lights, kitchen windows, living rooms, perfect synchronization. Then I saw it again. Someone walked past the front window of the Henderson house. This time I knew I hadn't imagined it. Before I could think twice, I ran across the street. I pounded on the front door. No answer. I tried the doorknob. Locked. I walked around the side of the house and shined my phone through the kitchen window. Nothing. The same coffee maker. The same fruit bowl. The same family calendar still hanging on the refrigerator. Then I heard it. A low mechanical hum. Not inside the house. Below it. I knelt beside the brick foundation and pressed my hand against the wall. The vibration was steady, powerful, far too strong to be coming from an empty home. The next morning, I called the electric company. I didn't ask who owned the account. I simply wanted to know whether the power was still active. The representative apologized. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't discuss another customer's account." "So someone is paying the bill." A brief silence. Then she repeated, "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" She hadn't answered directly. She didn't need to. That afternoon I bought a small drone. Nothing expensive. Just something capable of taking clear aerial photographs. If something unusual connected all these houses, I wanted to see it from above. I launched it from my backyard. Shortly before sunset. From the air, Willow Creek Drive looked even stranger. 12 identical homes, perfectly maintained, completely empty. Then something caught my attention. Behind every backyard stood the same green utility cabinet, waist high, freshly painted, perfectly aligned from one end of the street to the other. I'd walked past mine dozens of times without ever noticing it. From the ground it looked ordinary. From above it looked deliberate, almost like the markers traced a straight line beneath the neighborhood. That night I walked to the cabinet behind my fence. It had no utility company logo, only a small aluminum plate, LVR12, not a city code, Not anything I'd seen before. I pulled gently on the door. Locked. As I turned away, I heard voices beyond the Henderson backyard. I switched off my flashlight and waited. 3 men walked across the empty yard carrying hard equipment cases. They weren't trying to hide. One of them stopped beside the green cabinet behind the Henderson house and entered a code on a hidden keypad. A second later, the front panel clicked open. One by one, all 3 disappeared underground. The door closed behind them. I stood frozen. That wasn't a utility cabinet. It was an entrance. I waited almost 20 minutes. Nobody came back. When I returned home, I reviewed the drone footage frame by frame. After zooming in, I noticed something I'd completely missed earlier. The line of green cabinets didn't end with my street. It continued through the woods behind the subdivision, then crossed another neighborhood, then another. Each cabinet perfectly spaced from the next. This wasn't a single development. It was part of a much larger network. The question was no longer who had bought my neighborhood. It was why someone needed an underground system stretching beneath so many others. At exactly 9:14 the next morning, someone knocked on my front door. It wasn't the man from the pickup. This was someone else. Gray suit, leather folder, the same calm smile. "Mr. Foster?" "Yes. My name is David Sloan. I represent Lakeview Residential Holdings." I figured. He smiled politely. "I understand you've decided not to accept our initial offer. I didn't realize there was a deadline." "There isn't." He glanced toward the empty houses lining the street. "But I wouldn't wait too long. I like my house. So did everyone else." That sentence landed harder than he probably intended. "So why did they all leave?" "You'd have to ask them." "I did. And they wouldn't answer." His smile widened slightly. "Exactly." He reached into his folder and handed me another envelope. This offer was even larger. $3,250,000. Less than 24 hours had passed, and they'd increased the price by almost $1.5 million. David watched my expression. Then he quietly said, "Mr. Foster, we're not really buying your house." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He glanced past me toward the backyard. "We're buying the only property we're still missing." Before I could stop him, he walked back to a black SUV waiting at the curb and drove away. I didn't wait until nightfall. I walked straight into my backyard. The green utility cabinet suddenly looked completely different. Yesterday it had been something I'd never paid attention to. Now it felt like the center of the entire mystery. I pulled out the original property survey from the folder I'd kept since buying the house. Water lines, gas lines, electrical easements, everything was marked, except the cabinet. According to the county, it didn't exist. That afternoon I called an old college friend, Kevin Marshall. We'd studied civil engineering together, and he now worked for the North Carolina Department of Transportation. If anyone could identify unusual infrastructure, it was Kevin. He arrived just before 6 with a pickup full of surveying equipment. What exactly am I looking at? I wish I knew. But everyone on my street sold their houses, and this thing showed up around the same time. Kevin walked around the cabinet twice before kneeling beside its concrete base. "This isn't utility equipment." "You sure?" "Positive." He pointed at the anchor bolts. "They're almost new." "What about the cabinet itself?" "Also new." He ran his fingers across the paint. "They even weathered the surface on purpose, so it would look older." He stood up and looked at me. Someone wanted people to ignore it. Kevin returned to his truck and grabbed a handheld thermal camera. "Let's see what's underneath." He slowly scanned the cabinet. Nothing unusual. Then he pointed the camera toward the ground around it. The screen immediately changed color. A long band of warm earth stretched beneath my backyard. It continued beneath the Henderson house, then the Martins, then every property on the street. Kevin lowered the camera. "That's man-made." "What is it?" "I don't know, but something underground is generating heat, and it runs beneath every house." Just after sunset, we heard engines. 3 white vans rolled quietly into Willow Creek Drive. No logos, no markings, Workers wearing reflective vests stepped out. Each walked directly to one of the green cabinets. Within minutes, every cabinet stood open. One after another, the workers climbed underground. They moved confidently, like this was part of a routine. Kevin whispered, "They're not hiding." "No. They think nobody's watching." At exactly 9:43, the ground vibrated beneath our feet, only slightly, just enough to feel through our shoes. The vibration lasted about 30 seconds before fading away. Kevin raised the thermal camera again. The underground line beneath the neighborhood suddenly glowed bright orange. Heat spread rapidly beneath every property. He stared at the screen. "Andrew, whatever is under this neighborhood, it just powered on." Neither of us spoke. We simply stood there, watching the glowing line beneath Willow Creek Drive, both realizing the same thing. Those empty houses weren't abandoned. They were hiding something far bigger than either of us had imagined. The vibration stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Across the street, one of the workers climbed out of the green cabinet and locked the access panel behind him. Within minutes, all 3 vans quietly left Willow Creek Drive. The neighborhood looked abandoned again. Kevin lowered the thermal camera. "We're calling someone." "Who?" "I honestly don't know. But this is way beyond us." The next morning, Kevin started making phone calls. First the local utility company, then the county engineering office, finally the state transportation department. Every answer was identical. There is no registered underground utility corridor beneath Willow Creek Drive. After the 3rd call, Kevin frowned. "That's impossible." "What is?" They all used exactly the same wording. So, government offices don't accidentally repeat the same sentence. By lunchtime, we were sitting inside the county records office. An elderly clerk named Sharon helped us search through the original subdivision plans. Street layouts, water lines, storm drains, electrical easements. Everything matched the plans I'd received when I bought the house. Except for one thing. There were no green utility cabinets, no underground corridor, no permits filed during the previous year. Nothing. Sharon searched another database. Still nothing. She looked genuinely puzzled. The neighborhood simply stopped generating public records. When? She checked the screen again. About 11 months ago. Kevin and I looked at each other. That was exactly when Lakeview Residential Holdings had appeared. On the drive back, Kevin barely spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I know someone." "Who?" "A private utility consultant. He specializes in mapping underground infrastructure. You think he'll know what this is? I think he'll recognize it." His friend arrived that evening. His name was Eric Lawson. Within seconds of seeing the green cabinet, his expression changed. He walked around it once before pointing at the small aluminum plate, LVR12. "I've seen markings like this before." "Where?" I asked. He hesitated. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement." Kevin sighed. "Another NDA." Eric nodded. "I can't tell you where. But I can tell you this." He looked directly at me. "This isn't the only neighborhood." "What do you mean?" "I've seen these same cabinets in 3 different states. The same paint, the same locks, the same numbering system. And every project started with buying nearly every house on the street." A chill ran down my spine. "So this has happened before?" Eric nodded. "More than once." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard engines outside. I looked through my bedroom window. 4 black SUVs had stopped in front of my house. Nobody got out. The engines idled for several minutes. Then, without warning, every vehicle drove away at exactly the same time. The whole thing felt less like surveillance and more like a warning. In the next morning, I walked straight to the green cabinet. Something was different. The door wasn't fully closed. It hung open by just a few inches. Kevin arrived a few minutes later. Neither of us spoke. He slowly pulled the door open. Instead of wires or pipes, a steel ladder disappeared into darkness. Fresh, muddy boot prints covered the first few rungs. Cool air drifted upward. Not stale air, conditioned air. Someone was ventilating whatever lay beneath my backyard. Kevin looked at me. "I think we've just found why they wanted your property so badly." I stared into the darkness below. For the first time, I wasn't wondering who had bought my neighborhood. I was wondering what they had built underneath it. Kevin grabbed my arm before I could climb down. Don't. Why? If someone was using that ladder a few hours ago, they could still be down there. He was right. The shaft disappeared at least 20 feet before the darkness swallowed it completely. Cool, filtered air drifted upward. Not the stale smell of an abandoned tunnel. Fresh air, mechanically ventilated. Whatever was below us wasn't abandoned. Someone expected people to be there. Eric knelt beside the opening and shined his flashlight down the concrete walls. This shaft is new. How can you tell? He pointed to the steel brackets holding the ladder in place. No corrosion. No mineral stains. The concrete hasn't aged much either. Kevin looked at me. So they built this after buying the neighborhood. I nodded slowly. And they couldn't build one on your property. Because they didn't own it. For the first time, everything started fitting together. They weren't buying houses. They were buying access. My property was simply the last missing piece. Before we could decide what to do next, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. The same calm voice I'd heard before said, "You opened the cabinet." It wasn't a question. "You've been watching us." "Yes. You've seen enough." I glanced toward the open shaft. "I don't think I have." A long silence followed. Then he said, "Mr. Foster, the people working below your property have done nothing illegal." I laughed. "They built an underground facility without permits. You'd be surprised." Another pause. Then one final sentence. "Close the door. Walk away. You'll be compensated." The call ended. Kevin immediately looked around the cabinet. "If they knew you opened it, they're watching us." Eric searched the frame with his flashlight. There, hidden behind a small ventilation grill, was a tiny camera, no larger than a coin, pointed directly at anyone standing over the hatch. Kevin smiled. "Well, now we know how they knew." Less than an hour later, Officer Lisa Monroe arrived. She photographed the camera, the ladder, and the cabinet before calling her supervisor. When he arrived, he climbed only a few feet down the ladder before coming back up. His expression had completely changed. "What did you see?" I asked. He looked toward the open shaft. "This isn't a utility tunnel." "What is it?" "I honestly don't know. But it's finished." "What do you mean?" "Concrete walls, LED lighting, security cameras. It looks more like the hallway of an office building than underground infrastructure." About an hour later, 3 black SUVs pulled onto Willow Creek Drive. This time, they belonged to the FBI. Several agents stepped out carrying equipment cases. One of them introduced himself only as Special Agent Collins. He shook my hand. "Mr. Foster, we'll take it from here." I folded my arms. "You already know what's down there?" He gave a careful smile. "We've been looking into this company for quite some time." That answer bothered me. "You got here awfully fast." "We've had our suspicions." He nodded toward the open shaft. "But this is the first physical access point we've found." Within minutes, a robotic inspection camera was lowered into the opening. Everyone gathered around the monitor. The camera descended slowly. 20 feet, 30, 40. Then the ladder ended. A spotless concrete corridor stretched in both directions. Bright LED lighting, fresh paint, industrial ventilation, not a trace of dust. It looked brand new. The robot rolled deeper inside. Steel doors lined both sides of the hallway, each marked only with numbers. No company names, no warning signs, just numbers. Then the hallway opened into a massive chamber. Rows upon rows of metal cabinets stretched into the distance. Kevin stared at the screen. "Is that a data center?" Special Agent Collins slowly shook his head. "No." He zoomed in. "The racks are empty. No servers, no cables, no equipment. Just hundreds of perfectly installed cabinets waiting to be filled." I stared at the monitor. People don't spend hundreds of millions of dollars building something this large only to leave it empty. Which meant only one thing. Whatever this place had been built for, it hadn't started yet. The chamber was so large that the robot's lights couldn't reach the far wall. Row after row of identical steel racks disappeared into the darkness. Everything looked finished. Everything looked ready. Yet nothing had ever been installed. Special Agent Collins stared at the monitor. This wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. For what? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed the robot toward a pair of massive steel doors at the far end of the room. Unlike everything else underground, these doors carried no room numbers, only a single warning: authorized access only. Beside them was a biometric scanner. Kevin frowned. So someone planned on coming back. Collins nodded. Very recently. The robot zoomed in on the floor. Fresh, muddy footprints crossed the concrete. Dozens of them. Someone had cleared the facility only hours before we arrived. Before anyone could say another word, another FBI agent hurried over carrying a tablet. "Sir?" Collins looked up. "What is it?" "We've got company." The screen showed several black SUVs entering Willow Creek Drive from opposite directions. "They're back." Within seconds, agents spread across the neighborhood. 2 vehicles blocked both ends of the street. Others surrounded the green cabinet behind my house. No one was simply investigating anymore. They were preparing for a confrontation. A few minutes later, the lead SUV stopped in front of my driveway. David Sloan stepped out. The same gray suit. The same calm expression. He looked at the FBI vehicles without the slightest surprise. Then he looked directly at me. "I was hoping we could avoid this." Collins walked forward. "I'll need you to identify yourself." David calmly handed him an official credential. Collins studied it for several seconds. His expression changed. He handed it back without saying a word. I looked from one man to the other. "You two know each other?" Collins answered first. "I know who he works for." I stepped toward David. "Then explain everything." He looked around the empty neighborhood before speaking. "What you found isn't a private project." "It never was." Kevin folded his arms. "So who built it?" "The federal government." Silence settled over the street. David continued. "Officially, this facility doesn't exist. It was designed as a secure communications center that could be activated during a national emergency. The empty server rooms weren't unfinished. They were intentionally left ready for rapid deployment." I looked back toward the underground chamber on the monitor. "So that's why you bought every house?" David nodded. No one wanted homes sitting directly above critical infrastructure. Something still didn't make sense. "If that's true, why offer me more than $3 million? For the first time, David looked confused. $3 million. Yes. I approved an offer of 1.8. The FBI agents exchanged quick glances. Collins looked toward one of his investigators. "Pull every acquisition record." Within an hour, they had their answer. Someone inside Lakeview Residential Holdings had been inflating purchase prices and hiding millions of dollars through shell companies and fake consulting contracts. The neighborhood acquisition had become the perfect cover for a massive fraud scheme. The underground facility had been real, but so had the corruption surrounding it. David slowly shook his head. "I thought we were protecting classified infrastructure." He looked down at the financial records. It turns out someone was protecting their own bank account. The investigation lasted nearly a year. Several executives and contractors were charged with fraud, money laundering, and falsifying government contracts. Millions of dollars were recovered. Former homeowners received additional compensation. Most of them had never known why anyone wanted their houses. Now they finally had an answer. Not every detail became public. The underground facility remained classified. Even today, no official agency has confirmed exactly what it was built for. I eventually accepted an offer and moved away. Not because I wanted to. Because Willow Creek Drive would never be a neighborhood again. Construction crews demolished every house after the government officially acquired the land. Mine was the last to come down. As I watched the excavator tear through the walls where I'd spent the last 3 years of my life, I remembered the first conversation I'd had with David. He'd looked at my house and said they weren't really buying it. At the time, I thought he was trying to negotiate. I finally understood what he meant. They never wanted my home. They wanted the ground beneath it, and my house just happened to be standing in the way.